You came over to the United States from Singapore in order to study, and you were studying genomics. Why did you come here? And has the country paid off for you in the way that you hoped it would?
Um, I decided to come here because, Singapore is always like obviously kind of a very socially repressive place. If you're a natural rebel, which I was, it was I knew I needed to leave to at least live a portion of my life outside the country. And the United States for me was a first choice. Obviously, it appealed to me because of some values that were in direct opposition to the values that I grew up with in Singapore. The freedom of speech was very important. I was so aware of these what we would call OB markers, out of bounds markers. Um, and when you have a law that would penalize people for speech that could be, that basically if you offend the religious feelings of a certain group, you could be jailed as has happened. um, it really puts a damper on speech in the sense of self-censorship. So people do end up self-censoring, and you just feel like there's this general sense of you're walking on eggshells all the time. But in one way, it's just very clear. If you don't talk about race or criticize the government too much or talk about the legal system, you'll be fine. And you kind of knew that you just, as long as you didn't go there, you're okay. But it does have an overall effect on people. And I was always kind of a rebellious kid anyway, and coming to the United States was quite important to me. And I imagine that in college it would we'd be free to discuss anything, and of
Yeah,
course when
you
I got
really
there,
picked the wrong time to come to the United States, right?
I picked the right time. By the time I graduated, it was 2009. So that was before. It was really only later on, and I was actually working on campus at the time, that I started to see all the shenanigans. And, that was like, I was probably one of the first ones to start speaking out about it because I could sense, I think people that live in countries where speech is repressed tend to have a particular sensitivity to it. It's like our antenna, like, oops, something's wrong. You have the kids here who, these are supposed to be your educated class. They're going to be the elites of your entire cohort. And they're the ones clamoring for censorship. They're the ones displaying this uber sensitivity to everything. I wanted to shut speech down, disinvite speakers. And that's when I realized like something is wrong with America. But in speaking out, one of the pushbacks that I got was, this is kind of fine too. This is just fringe. Don't worry, it's a phase. They're just crazy college students. This will never survive contact with reality after they graduate. 6 years into it, right? Maybe this is like 2014. That was wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so two questions. And first, you said you were kind of a born rebel or individualist or whatever. Do you think it's really temperamental like that, or were there particular experiences or books that you read? Because we're going to talk about Ideas Beyond Borders, which translates books, kind of Western Enlightenment type books, secular books, into Arabic and then distributes them in the Arab speaking world. So you're exporting your troublemaking even more than you might have been just by walking around Singapore. But is it really just a kind of temperament, or is it something that you think was learned by you from either the things you read or the experiences you had?
Oh, I'm sure it's a mix of all things. But I grew up into a very I guess my mom was Methodist, and so I was sent to Protestant schools my whole life, and very active. She was very active in church. And I definitely remember questioning a lot of the Sunday school teachers, even when I was 6 or 7, to the point that I had to get out of class. Um, and other kids who grew up, in the same social milieu, um, would just sit there and just kind of go along with it. I never really could get into religion, and I tried. And I knew that speaking up was a bit of a, it's a kind of culture where even just asking questions was frowned upon, because part of Confucian values is there's hierarchy. You should always respect your teacher, and information flow is top down, not bottom up. And that's one of the bigger contrasts with America. When I came here for college, I'm like, you mean you can talk back to the professor? You mean this is a discussion?
Yeah.
I mean, it was mind blowing. It just was a total culture shock. You mean I can call the professor by his first name? I didn't have to like, sir or madam. It's such a different.
Unless it's Dr. Jill Biden.
Oh, that's
You can
true.
just call them Jill or Bill or whatever. It's fascinating to think about introducing Protestant Christianity into an Asian culture or into a Catholic culture in Europe in the 17th 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, where there's such a premium in Protestant theology and individual experience, individual interpretation. That it seems like a bad idea to be introducing Christianity into Asian settings if what you want is to maintain hierarchy.
Actually is doing so well. So the country with the largest number in proportion wise of Christians is actually going to be China in the next by 2025. Look at mega churches in Korea. It's huge in Asia. Christianity is booming there, and is booming as it is on the decline here in the West in general.
What explains that? Is it that they that it's actually true and people are going to be they're banking on being saved, or what is appealing about Christianity in communist China?
No, it's not really necessarily communist China. I think culturally, the um, sort of, I think both Christianity and values, like Asian values, which I really don't like that term. Um, they There's something that goes kind of hand in hand. This like work ethic, Christian ethic, the simplicity of seeing the world, with like good and evil and salvation. It appeals to the Asian mindset very much. And then also Christianity is very focused on the nuclear family and social conservatism. And Asians are social conservatives, and it's one of the reasons why many of them, are vote for Republicans.
So my other question was, when you started to encounter in an American context students being the ones who were saying like, hey, don't ask questions or don't make statements that are kind of upsetting to people. Where do you think that's coming from? Because it used to be the idea is that you go to college, and this is mythologized and romanticized a bit, but the idea was you would go to college in order to be offended or to be exposed to things that you couldn't possibly believe are true, and you would have long late night conversations, arguing about everything, and that seems to not be what the dream is anymore. What's going on with the new kind of repression on campuses?
I quite fully buy into George Lukanow's work and Jonathan Haidt with Coddling of the American Mind. And I think this concept of safetyism is really coming from the kind of parenting for a few decades that have led up to this point.
So you're indicting me and my parenting. Point taken. I offered no defense, but
I
yeah.
mean, think about how different America would be if we were all brought up by Amy Chua. We would be able to take a lot. It's you know Okay, maybe that was extreme, but there is a sense that that kind of parenting is not really inculcating a sense of resilience, emotional resilience to things. And we're so, we're creating a generation that's just used to having their feelings validated all the time. You could be anything, participation trophy for you. And in fact that, in part that's a bit of a lie, right? Like we tell these kids all the time, you can be anything you want, and it's great. It's in fact, I mean, liberalism was great coming from a conservative society where, you're told, no, you can't be anything you want. It's not you do you, basically your the path available to you is pretty constrained.
If not Singapore itself, in a lot of countries where it's like at a certain age you take an exam, and if you don't make a certain score, then whole swaths of the future are just blocked off to you. I mean, that's a terrible world to live in,
Terrible.
isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
terrible. I fully believe it's terrible. But there is a dark side to the American method, I think, and we're starting to feel it. A lot of kids are not given that dose of reality. They're, if you're told for your whole life that you can be anything, by the time you hit college and your options start dwindling, you start to see your own limitations. All of a sudden it hits you. You're like, wait a minute, maybe I can't do anything. And that, you know, dissidence, that existential crisis it creates is, it can be pretty damaging.